Well, there are many existing standards bodies that are focused on the technical specification of next generation broadband. But the WBBA has been created to focus on the business, financial, and the regulatory challenges of creating a viable next generation broadband industry over the coming 10 to 15 years.
Today, broadband networks and the services that ride atop are, to many, deemed critical national infrastructure, essential to our modern digital lives in all of its forms. Yet, as an industry, we are somewhat overlooked, few noticing the wonders of the physics and many taking for granted the service until it's no longer there. The World Broadband Association has agreed a shared vision, ultra broadband for all, as a key enabler for a more equitable, sustainable future.
We're working with the World Broadband Association to try and get the high-speed, low-latency connectivity to suburban and rural communities. Many parts of the world focused on getting broadband connectivity to metro and metropolitan areas, and we believe that this high-speed, low-latency connectivity is required in the more rural areas to try and get the digital transformation so badly needed for these businesses.
For most of us, 2022 has been a year of change. Post the pandemic, social and economic recovery has picked up steam over the past year. And we are learning how to both survive and thrive in this new normal. This year has also been a year of growth for the WBBA. We have overhauled our organizational structure, and more members from around the world, including telecom operators, vendors, investors, are now on board, truly making the WBBA an increasingly important platform for international collaboration within the broadband industry.
All countries, therefore, regardless of their broadband legacy, should aim to develop a network that meets the World Broadband Association's vision of ultra-high-speed connectivity for all, a converged network that will help accelerate monetization, an agile network that enables new business models, full automation to maximize network and operations optimization, and a network that is fully secure and has minimal impact on the environment.
WBBA is an international platform focusing on the development of the cloud, broadband, and committed to promoting broadband industry cooperation. China Telecom will be more than glad to share our experiences in cloud broadband with global industrial chain partners, jointly build a new cloud network convergence infrastructure, connect the world, and enable the digital transformation forward a prosperous future.
We've gone from kilobits per second to megabits per second. We're now in the gigabit era. It's quite amazing what we're achieving, and broadband is actually changing people's lives. So the single most important thing that the World Broadband Association has to do over the next couple of years is to create that same sense of excitement with people everywhere about broadband, to influence policymakers, regulators, investors, that broadband is something that everybody needs and that we need to invest in.
Chorus joined the WBBA because we believe that it will help identify and drive share goals across the broadband industry. We know that as a collective, we can learn from each other, grow, and adapt to the future trends in our dynamic industry. In a short period of time, the WBBA has already released several white papers and is running global workshops looking at the various opportunities and the challenges ahead.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the World Broadband Association Annual Event 2020. I'd like to also extend a welcome to those members and colleagues who are joining us online today. My name is Mark Oliver. I'm Senior Consulting Director at Omdia, which is the research and consulting arm of Informa Tech, and I will be your event host throughout today. I'm also very delighted to have been a WBBA member since its very inception. And what I'll do over the next couple of minutes is just set the scene for what it is that we'll cover together today over the course of the next few hours. I'd like just to take a step back and revisit how we've come to be here today at this World Broadband Association annual event. If I go back to late 2020, Omdia produced a research paper called Delivering on the Promises of Broadband. And whilst our research shows that fixed broadband revenues will grow faster than mobile revenues on an annual basis until 2026, we also identified that there are a number of key challenges that the industry faces if it really wants to deliver on the potential of ultra broadband for all. And you can see the 6 key industry challenges that we came up with in that paper on the screen behind me. On producing that paper, we were challenged by some of our industry partners as to, what is perpetuating these industry challenges? What is the broadband world doing to try to address them? And from that conversation, we started to look at the potentially fragmented nature of the broadband industry and the need to bring that industry together in a community basis in order to discuss, address the challenges and access the opportunities. And that really is where the World Broadband Association was born from. We are committed to, as an organization, addressing the challenges that you see on the screen here, but also delivering on the promise behind me, connecting the world to high quality ultra broadband. When we sat down with our first group of founder members in the middle of 2021, one of the things that kept coming up time and time again was the need for the broadband industry to deliver or develop a collective voice. And not just a collective voice, but one which was differentiated from the established good work that's already being done by standards bodies, policymakers, etc. And we've built that collective voice together through our thought leadership, through our working groups, which bring the members together and coalesces them around some of the hottest industry topics, through events like this and some of the digital events that we've previously run, and also the fact that we, as at the end of this year, are going to be registered as an independent legal entity in Switzerland as well, taking us to the next stage of association maturity. Just a short call to action from me on this slide here. We'd really be keen for you and your partners and your peers to join us together on this World Broadband Association journey. Please do grab me at any point today around the workshop. Please join us at booth B61 for a conversation. And also we'd love to invite you to join us from 5 p.m. in here for our informal networking cocktail drinks. Now, looking ahead to the course of the rest of today into our agenda, what is it that we're going to cover together? First of all, we're going to look at how is it that we build the case for greater broadband investment. And I'm delighted that I'll be able to invite Eric Verstraets onto the stage from FTTH Council Europe, as well as Nokia, to talk to us about that particular topic. We'll then be able to consider what are the consumer and enterprise services of the future, and what is it that the network technology roadmap needs to look like to enable those services in the future. And we'll have member colleagues from across the WBBA to deliver keynotes and panel conversations on that particular topic. We'll then look at the importance of sustainability and service provider strategies. This has been one of the key focus areas for the WBBA. We've delivered thought leadership research on this matter. You'll find the QR code to download the papers on your desks. And we'll be introducing WBBA members, including Trevor Linney from OpenReach and JB Russello, the CEO of Chorus, to discuss that with us. And then we'll finish the day by looking at really the most interesting and innovative use cases which the broadband industry is already enabling. And we'll be welcoming WBBA members Ookla and Nokia to talk us through some of those particularly innovative case studies and use cases that they're already delivering to show us the power that already exists in the broadband industry. I'd like to thank all of our members, our speakers and our panelists for contributing to not just this event today, but also the ongoing success of the WBBA. And I'd now like to welcome onto stage, delighted to introduce Martin Kriener, WBBA Director General, for his welcome address and keynote speech.
Well, just to reiterate Mark's welcome to everyone in the room. It's great to be at the first face-to-face WBBA event, and I hope this is the first of a long series of interesting events that will happen both here within Europe and right across the world. As Mark said, I'm Martin Kriener. I've got a long history in this industry. I've worked in the operators, worked in the various supply side. I spent about a dozen years as the president and CEO of the Telemanagement Forum, which many of you may be familiar with. And I've also, and since about 2015, I've been writing books on a wide range of topics in this industry. And over the last year, I've taken on the role as Director General of the WBBA. It's a hugely exciting opportunity for the industry. As Mark mentioned, the WBBA is really focused on the business and financial and regulatory challenges that are facing us, but there are also opportunities as well. And it's all about trying to bring together the stakeholders in the industry so that we can find joint solutions to some of these common problems and accelerate broadband penetration everywhere in the world. And when I talk about an industry, I see it in terms of a supply side and a demand side. And the supply side of the industry is where, of course, the WBBA is starting. It's bringing on board great companies like Nokia and Huawei and China Telecom and Swisscom and Chorus and Telecom Algeria and many others, all of whom are really on the supply side of the equation. These are the people who are creating this next generation of broadband and delivering it to the market. But there's also a demand side to this. And the demand side is really it's in the B2C world, it's the maybe online gaming companies, it's the metaverse players. Or in the B2B world, it's players in smart manufacturing or smart health or smart cities. Or it's also the people who are creating the devices that will create the demand for next generation of broadband. And it's bringing all of these various constituencies together, who are the critical stakeholders, and trying to find a way to understand what is the timing for when we will need next generation broadband. Of course, next generation broadband is a continuous process, and it has been happening gradually over the last number of years and will happen gradually over the next decade. But the timing of the investment and understanding that timing of investment is going to be a critical point in enabling us to achieve a sustainable return on investment for all of the stakeholders in the industry. So we're trying to understand the demand side and how quickly the supply side needs to create all of the great features that we all know broadband can deliver, so that we can achieve a returnable or a sustainable return on investment for all the key stakeholders. Mark briefly mentioned, and there's a sheet of paper on the table there as well, talking about some of the early output of the WBBA. And there's 4 key pieces of output in the form of white papers that have been developed. We've certainly been looking at what are the arguments and the importance for greater investment in broadband. We've been looking at the next generation roadmap and what does that roadmap look like. And that's particularly from the supply side at the moment. We've been looking at the whole challenge of environmental sustainability and how broadband is becoming part of the solution in the global sustainability challenge we all face. And we've also been looking at and gathering and collating the success stories of what excellence in broadband looks like. I won't go through these in any great detail, because right through today, what we're going to hear is the experts who have developed and authored these white papers go through the detail of these papers. But one of the things that stood out for me on the whole area of the importance of greater broadband investment was how tightly linked broadband investment is to growth in GDP in different parts of the world. And I think that whilst we're here in a business context, there's also a very strong social, societal argument globally for investing in broadband, because every time we run a fibre into into a village in a poorer part of the world, we grow the GDP of that village, we grow the GDP of that country. And every time we run a fibre into a village, or we run broadband into a community in a poorer part of the world, we change the life and the behaviour of the societies that are there. So there's a lot of very strong reasons, and this paper that we're going to hear more about today brings out a lot of that rationale, the importance not just for the developed economies but also for the developing economies. We're going to hear a fair bit about the next generation roadmap, and we have developed a next generation, our first cut at the next generation roadmap for broadband. And to keep it in line with what we're very comfortable with in terms of 3G, 4G, 5G and so on, we've adopted very similar naming and terminology. But the characteristics of next generation broadband are going to be quite interesting, quite detailed, as we look at things like the types of speeds that are going to be available. If we're currently sitting at what we call BB5, BB 5.5 and BB 6 and beyond are going to be offering very substantial increases in the types of speeds that are available. And quite frankly, several of my conversations this morning with people are saying, we don't really know what the demand will be for those higher speeds, but what we've always seen in the industry, and I've been in the industry over 30 years, whatever capability and whatever supply and whatever bandwidth we provide to industry, to consumers, it gets consumed. We are in an endlessly inventive race, and we will find ways to consume that bandwidth. But it's not just bandwidth, it's latency, it's changes in the level of sustainability, it is more secure environments. So when we talk about the broadband roadmap, we will hear the detail of what we see as the key characteristics of each of the upcoming generations. And this is a work in progress, because whilst we have our first view of what that next generation roadmap is going to look like, we have to invest time and effort in understanding the detail around a roadmap and then matching that to what the demand side will want and when it will want that type of capability. We mentioned success stories, and success stories are really important because broadband it's not a world that is starting now. Broadband in different parts of the world have been moving very rapidly for a long number of years, and one of the key benefits that the WBBA is delivering is capturing the case studies for what success looks like that can then be copied or repeated in other regions without having to reinvent the wheel. Sustainability is the final white paper that we've developed, and the sustainability focus and the sustainability discussion has grown in volume over the last 12 to 24 months. And so we'll have a panel session that I'll participate on later on today to talk about some of the outputs of our sustainability white paper, but also hear direct inputs from some of the key members of the WBBA in terms of how important this is, how the WBBA can help accelerate a more sustainable approach to the environment through our behaviour in broadband. So I'll just finish up with a brief overview of some of the upcoming work. Those 4 white papers that have been produced over the last number of months have been very well received, and they are freely available to all members. But the upcoming work is to bring those to another level. One is to look at broadband advocacy, and it's really trying to understand what is how are we going to move forward on on winning the arguments to accelerate broadband in all different parts of the world. And those arguments will be different in different regions, but there will be also commonalities. We're also very interested in looking at the demand side of the equation. I've spoken about the supply side and demand side. We have focused a lot on understanding the supply capability of the industry, but we are just about to kick off a project to understand the demand side of this industry and what will the metaverse really require over the coming decade. What will online gaming require? What types of new devices are emerging, and what types of pressure will they put on the broadband networks of the future? We certainly have to go into a more detailed understanding of what the roadmap from the supply side looks like, and we have to develop a lot more detail in understanding the subtleties for what is required and what we are capable of delivering in broadband. And we're broadening out our sustainability work into, it's not just about the carbon impact of broadband, but it's about the societal impact of broadband, and linking that and understanding which of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and so on are going to be better accelerated through excellence in broadband. So let me leave you with that, and we'll move into the full agenda today. I'm really excited to hear the detail and the conversations and the panel sessions today, and I hope you are too. And I do urge you, if you're not already a member of the WBBA, please consider joining. Please consider engaging with this. If this is important to your industry, then and to your business, then please engage and help us move this forward more rapidly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. I think it's fair to say that in the short existence of the WBBA, as we've just seen in Martin's presentation, lots has already been done, but still lots to do. Next year, I think, will be a transformative year for the association, and we very much welcome your feedback on where we should go in the future, how we should go about it. So, please do share that feedback with us. Next, I'd like to introduce on screen a keynote presentation from Dr. Jun Li, Vice President from WBBA Founder Member, China Telecom.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to have this opportunity to be here with World Broadband Association partners, and it's my great pleasure to share our point of views about global broadband development, the practice of China Telecom about cloud and network convergence, and our expectations about WBBA. Broadband network is an important component of digital information infrastructure, and also the key foundation for creating digital competitiveness. During the COVID-19 pandemic, broadband connection has played an essentially important role. For instance, e-meeting, distance education, and medical care have become an indispensable part of people's daily life. The development of broadband has shown three major features: high speed, cloud-based, and intelligence. We're seeing 10 gigabit into the community, 1G optical access for residential users, and Wi-Fi 6 for home gigabit. The introduction of technologies like NFV, SDN will reduce enterprises' CapEx and OpEx, and intelligence is to improve the bandwidth utilization and user experiences. It's time to expedite the construction of new infrastructure, such as broadband networks and data centers, to enable the global digital transformation. Meanwhile, there are three major challenges obstructing the development of broadband. First, digital divide exists in the world. Broadband construction is a heavy investment field with a long commercial return period. Therefore, the broadband penetration is insufficient, approximately 65% in developing countries and only 35% in the least developed countries. Second, the contents and services hardly meet the growing demand. It is of great need to deeply connect the industrial chain through the integration of information technology and the industry, promote the digital upgrading of industries and achieve green and sustainable development. Third, the intelligence level of the network is insufficient. It needs to support cloud network convergence, intelligent networking, ubiquitous access, guaranteed services, quantifiable security, and other new capabilities to meet the growing demand of customers. Facing the current challenges of broadband development in the world, China Telecom responds with upgrading ubiquitous infrastructure actively and boosts of a leading broadband network. By the end of June 2022, the number of China Telecom broadband users amounted to 177 million. Our optical fiber covered 98% of administrative villages nationwide. For more than 300 cities and towns, the upgrading 10G-PON optical network have accessed 150 million residences. China Telecom's all-room Wi-Fi households have reached 96 million units, and we are carrying out our deployment of all optical gigabit Wi-Fi. As a full-service operator, China Telecom has 388 million mobile phone users, including 240 million 5G users. Working closely with China Unicom, we explored an innovative mechanism of 5G co-building and co-sharing and activated 960,000 5G base stations for the time being. China Telecom is in leading position of building a new information infrastructure with cloud network convergence features, enabling the digital economy. The eCloud sub-company ranked #1 among global operators' public cloud IaaS. In the first half of 2022, eCloud provides services for 2 million clients, with revenue amounted to $4 billion. A year-on-year growth rate is up to 100%. We have built a hierarchical computing power service systems with cloud, edge, and terminals, and the computing power scale has reached 3.1 EFLOPS. And we have developed the distributed cloud system, Cloud OS 4.0, providing strong power for the digital transformation of the whole society. Today, the broadband industry is seeing significant innovations in technology, services, and business model. WBBA is born at the right time. As a founding member of it, China Telecom has great expectations for WBBA. We sincerely wish WBBA will play an important role of serving global broadband network operators, vendors, cloud service providers, and other stakeholders, uniting the global industry chain, facilitating industry chain communication and exchanges, enhancing technological cooperation, promoting the innovation and development of the global cloud and network information infrastructure, and to achieve the prosperity of the cloud and broadband industry around the world. The members of WBBA on this unique platform could obtain resources and services such as world high-level forums, exhibitions, annual development, and business innovation practices. In the long term, further services could be provided such as training, certification, broadband development funds, etc. With that, extensive end-to-end industrial cooperation can be formed. The global broadband infrastructure level and broadband service capability can be comprehensively improved. WBBA members, partners, can effectively reduce their CapEx and OpEx and get access to the high-quality development. Ladies and gentlemen, the digital economy has opened the door to reshape the global economic landscape and facilitate inclusive and sustainable growth. Let's embrace it, come into it, contribute to it, and grow with it, together with WBBA. We truly hope that more and more stakeholders will join WBBA in the endeavor to enhance the collaboration of global broadband industry, join the journey to eliminate the digital divide, and bring the benefits of digital economy to people around the world. We are looking forward to working closely with WBBA and all of you for a brighter future, for a better world. Thank you so much.
Lee. We'll hear in a moment about the rise of investment in fibre access, but we've talked a little bit about what is it that the members are benefiting from, what are the member priorities about getting involved in the WBBA, and what we'd like to do is just for the next minute or two just provide a show reel of how people are engaging with the association, what it is that they are focusing and prioritising on, and what it is that they're getting out of being part of the World Broadband Association.
Well, there are many existing standards bodies that are focused on the technical specification of next generation broadband. But the WBBA has been created to focus on the business, the financial and the regulatory challenges of creating a viable next generation broadband industry over the coming 10 to 15 years.
Today, broadband networks and the services that ride atop are, to many, deemed critical national infrastructure, essential to our modern digital lives in all of its forms. Yet, as an industry, we are somewhat overlooked, few noticing the wonders of the physics and many taking for granted the service until it's no longer there. The World Broadband Association has agreed a shared vision, ultra broadband for all, as a key enabler for a more equitable, sustainable future.
We're working with the World Broadband Association to try and get the high-speed, low-latency connectivity to suburban and rural communities. Many parts of the world focused on getting broadband connectivity to metro and metropolitan areas, and we believe that this high-speed, low-latency connectivity is required in the more rural areas to try and get the digital transformation so badly needed for these businesses.
For most of us, 2022 has been a year of change. Post-pandemic social and economic recovery has picked up steam over the past year, and we are learning how to both survive and thrive in this new normal. This year has also been a year of growth for the WBBA. We have overhauled our organizational structure, and more members from around the world, including telecom operators, vendors, investors, are now on board, truly making the WBBA an increasingly important platform for international collaboration within the broadband industry.
All countries, therefore, regardless of their broadband legacy, should aim to develop a network that meets the World Broadband Association's vision of ultra-high-speed connectivity for all, a converged network that will help accelerate monetization, an agile network that enables new business models, full automation to maximize network and operations optimization, and a network that is fully secure and has minimal impact on the environment.
WBBA is an international platform focusing on the development of the cloud, broadband, and committed to promoting broadband industry cooperation. China Telecom will be more than glad to share our experiences in cloud broadband with global industrial chain partners, jointly build a new cloud network convergence infrastructure, connect the world, and enable the digital transformation forward a prosperous future.
We've gone from kilobits per second to megabits per second. We're now in the gigabit era. It's quite amazing what we're achieving, and broadband is actually changing people's lives. So the single most important thing that the World Broadband Association has to do over the next couple of years is to create that same sense of excitement with people everywhere about broadband, to influence policymakers, regulators, investors, that broadband is something that everybody needs and that we need to invest in.
Chorus joined the WBBA because we believe that it will help identify and drive share goals across the broadband industry. We know that as a collective, we can learn from each other, grow, and adapt to the future trends in our dynamic industry. In a short period of time, the WBBA has already released several white papers and is running global workshops looking at the various opportunities and the challenges ahead.
Earlier earlier this year, the World Broadband Association surveyed 150 operators and enterprises from around the world to address topics including the importance of broadband to their business, their network readiness, the barriers to improving broadband quality. And we analysed those survey results in order to identify or to quantify, if you like, the need for greater broadband infrastructure investment, but also to highlight the barriers to that investment and what is it that governments and organisations like the World Broadband Association can do to overcome those barriers. And you'll find a QR code to that analysis on the pages in front of you on the tables. To explore some of those themes and opportunities and behaviours, I'd like to welcome on stage Eric Verstraetz, Strategic Marketing Director, Fixed Networks at Nokia and President, FTTH Council Europe.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, all. Martin and colleagues, thank you for having us here, being able to present at the first, let's say, big event of the World Broadband Association, which is a wonderful initiative that we, of course, as the Fiber to the Home Council Europe, absolutely want to sustain as well. We already discussed potential cooperation and collaboration exercises between us. Let me bring, in fact, the view of what we see in Europe at the level of investment. And I call it the rise of investment in fiber access. The dynamics are huge today. But first, let me introduce the Fiber to the Home Council Europe, which is a European organization, industry organization, that has a mission to advance ubiquitous, full fiber-based connectivity and adoption. And today we're going to talk about the investment part, but we see that in a lot of countries the investment is ongoing or already done. So we also look into the adoption of fiber in the whole of Europe. We are an organization of 150 members from the whole ecosystem of the fiber industry, which means vendors, active vendors, passive vendors, operators, investors, academics, and we share in fact the whole expertise from the entire FTTH value chain. So and that's where we see also some potential cooperation with WBBA and FTTH Council Europe. Our name is Fiber to the Home Council, which means that we first target fiber to the home at the residential and consumer space, but we see that that technology is also used more for enterprise, more for smart city connectivity, for 5G, 6G, mobile transport, conveyance, etc., etc. And that's where I try to make the link with the investment as such, because it is clear that today you invest in a fiber infrastructure and you monetize that again and again and again. So you're not only laying that fiber infrastructure for, let's say, that residential broadband that you're offering, but you have all sorts of other type of applications on top of that. Business services, as I mentioned, wholesaling towards other operators in the market, mobile transport, cloud gaming, immersive entertainment, smart city, whatever. So you see that it comes a bit back to the original slide I shown you. That's exactly the investment pattern. Invest once and monetize again and again and again. And that's why we see that today there are so many markets where you see that private investors next to public investors, but private investors are stepping in because they believe that it's a good investment to do. As Council Europe, we also look into the market panorama. We try to monitor very closely what the fiber penetration is in each country of the European continent. And I will quickly show you a few examples of what we share, not to stay there for long, but just to show you the main elements. We talk about the coverage rate and take-up rate, and we see that in Europe, in fact, we're today at something like a 50% coverage, and it's like a 50% of that take rate, which means that if you talk about full penetration, we're around 25 or 28% towards the full population, which means there is quite a lot of growth to be expected, and we see the dynamics to make sure that this happens as well. What we do is we look at the homes passed, we look at the ranking of the different countries, and we, by that monitor, we see, for instance, what are the most growing countries in Europe, and we try to detect what is the rationale behind it, what are the conferences, what are the circumstances, and so on. We see that Belgium, France, UK, and Germany are the biggest growing today in homes passed. There's quite some investment in these countries. because there's still a lot of work to do to fiberize these whole countries. You see then also at the level of the relative or absolute figures, you see of course that there's a difference because bigger countries and smaller countries do not compare the same. Belgium, by the way, is leading now at the number of percentage growth at homes passed because there's quite some investment in Belgium these days. The forecast leads us to what you see here at the number of homes passed and the number of subscribers. Being the homes passed, think like 300 million in 2027, and where we reach, in fact, for the subscribers, something like 2/3 of that, something like 200 million subscribers. There's not a big extrapolation that we have to do because if we see that the growth of the last year or the last 2 years is going that way, we see that we easily end up with these type of figures. So there's quite some momentum there. Another way of looking at it is who has the most work to do. We have tables on understanding what is left to be installed as homes passed in each country. So you see here the figures, and then you see that in the UK, Germany and Italy there are still many households to be covered. It's almost 60% of the number of households to be covered still. Now this is on the market panorama we call. This is the figures of where we are and where we move to. But we also do a lot of lobbying versus the European Commission to understand how we can help in creating the best circumstances, best environment to go to full investment and to full adoption. So you know that there is a policy goal of the European Union that every European household will have access to high-speed internet coverage by 2025. This is the digital decade, which is constantly monitored by the Commission, and that gigabit connectivity should be there by 2030. But these are the goals as such. Of course, you need to implement policy and legislative tools in order to come to that. We as a council, we write a lot of lobbying consultations towards the European Electronic Communications Code, towards the Broadband Cost Reduction Directive. These are all elements that the European Commission puts in place to stimulate competition, to stimulate innovation, to stimulate service differentiation at the level of broadband deployment. And we, of course, as a council, are very active in protecting there and safeguarding the fact that fiber is the cornerstone of this equipment. If you talk about very high capacity networks, they should be built with fiber because it's the future-proof, it's a sustainable technology. So we should be working on bringing these elements as much as we can also to the policymakers today. Not all of them know it, but it starts to be 80% or 90%, and we see that definitely this is a fiber growth that we can expect there. Very high capacity networks should be built with fiber. Now, to come to the investment, because that's at the end what we want to talk about, we investigate a lot what we see at the level of public and private investments in FTTH. Now, if you talk about Europe, I can tell you today, 80% of the investments are on private basis. Yeah? 80%, which is a lot. And of course, the public policies, the public fundings and so on, are treated in areas where there is no, in principle, no business case or less good business case for private investors to step in. And that could be a good balance. We are really lobbying for bringing that balance, that the money is well spent both from public and private investors throughout Europe. You see here some figures at the right-hand side on the different private investments you see. You see a few cases like for City Fibre in UK, there is TIM in Italy, there is TDC in Denmark. It can be in the incumbent space, it can be in the alternative provider space. It depends where the private equity holders put their money and where the investment funds can be used. If you talk about public investments, it is clear that the objectives should be there in the electronic code. Of course, it is there, and that has to be checked for every country within the European Union on, let's say, the applicability and the fact that that country responds to these policies that are put in place. A few elements there. I will not go through the whole detail, but of course, ready to discuss with you that in more detail. So public investments are needed in areas where there is no clear business case. I already mentioned. If you really want to promote the fact that private investors are stepping in, leave the public money to there where there is no interest for the moment for private investment. That gives the best balance. Anything that falls in the category of very high capacity networks should not qualify for state aid. EU funding and European Investment Bank investments complement investments at the national level. So we see they're equalizing all these investments. And for instance, the EU Recovery and Resilience Facility has been brought in place once we had the COVID and had to come out of the COVID pandemic. We see that member states already committing 26% to digital transition, because there is more than only that, but the digital transition, 1/4 of it is spent towards digital transition, including very high capacity networks that are based on fiber. Now, the Council has made a study on what is now the risk for certain players to step into an investment for fiber. And that's why you see here this guide that has been made. We studied 8 different business models with understanding why is Deutsche Glasfaser, for instance, in Germany, stepping into, let's say, smaller cities into investment. Why is Eurofiber in Belgium and the Netherlands and so on investing in putting networks for high reliability, enterprise connectivity, and so on? Why are some of these wholesale players like CityFiber working with an anchor tenant operator in order to get then sufficient chance for return on investment on what they put in the market? And these elements are absolutely very important for understanding what the investment schemes are and why these investors step into that. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I invite you to look at these successful fiber business models, because it can help a lot in sharing the do's and the don'ts of what should I do in Europe and how do I limit, as an investor, the risk of stepping into that infrastructure deployment. There are some challenges, of course, next to the opportunities. I tried to build here these 5 or 6 challenges we see, because of course I see there's a lot of investment, but there's also a lot of work to do. And we would be delighted that at the end, in a couple of years from now, that the fiber connectivity would be at its top in Europe. But we see that it's going the right way. Now, 60%, which is in the EU 27 plus UK, of the home pass potential, I mentioned already, of those who are still, we have to install, 60% of them is in these big countries like Italy, Germany, UK. That's why we see plenty of dynamics there. Plenty of dynamics in that case. We should increase the take-up. As I said at the beginning, I'm talking now about investment, which investment means to have the homes passed and the coverage there. But the next step is to get people online and to have the service adopted. And that's where a lot of steps have to be done, have to be taken into account. We look into in-home broadband excellence, we look into demand drivers, we look into the fact that what is now bringing the customer from that fiber that comes through his street to really have it connected and to be online. And that's in fact the key, because that's when, at that point in time, you'll have a full penetration. So there are quite still some challenges, but we see that we shoot for 62% of Europe by 2027. And we try to help with that with a lot of demand driver studies, and we have a whole committee talking about in-home broadband excellence to see, not so much to discuss about the practical things or about the technical things, because we have organizations to do that, but certainly to understand what are the value-added services you can offer. How can you avoid the churn for operators to move to other operators? And how can you really create for an operator also the interest in moving to adopting the subscribers? In-home connectivity, as I mentioned. Rural coverage. We all know, of course, that the business case in rural is not the same as it is in very dense areas, in very, very competitive areas. And there, of course, there are a lot of, there the public funding plays an important role. If there's no private funding there, public funding like state aid plays an important role there. Copper switch off is very obvious. We talk about that for years. We see that it's happening, and we see that it's more and more coming. Of course, coppers can be resolved. The buildings that where you have today, these central offices can be let's say used for something else, or real estate. They can be bought, etc., etc. So you can reuse that money to put it in fiber infrastructure. So that's a no-brainer, I think, today. And then there are some small things I just like to touch, which is the fact that, and we see that in fiber deployment happening, that there's a lack of resources today. There's a lack of real people that know the fiber business because it's booming so much, and that's to some extent withholds a bit the deployment and the adoption of fiber. So having the necessary talents, the necessary resources and people there, we also try to build up their program to help and to stimulate that evolution is important. Limiting the red tape, of course, all the bureaucracy has to be out of fiber as much as possible. You need to go to databases where you can easily find where all the fiber is installed in order to make all that a more interesting case, to be sure that, of course, the permits are much more easy, etc., etc., etc. A lot of things there to be done. The network quality, and then all the policy and regulations evolutions. We do our best, if we talk about the European Commission, I'm talking about the European case, to be sure that we lobby as much as we can in order to make that investment scheme for fiber in Europe the best we can imagine. Okay, I was there. I hope I stayed into my 15 minutes. It was a hell of a job to bring all the elements in these 15 minutes. I hope I could give you an example of how we, as a council, of course, look at investments, but nothing about the council here. There's plenty of opportunity, plenty of work to do still, but the environment is very interesting today, and we see quite some investment schemes. So if you're interested in understanding the do's and don'ts of these models that work or do not work, please have a look at it, because I think it's useful information for that. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. And I think our timekeeper has confirmed that you were right to the minute there, so well done. Thank you very much for keeping to time. Since May of this year, the WBBA members have been gathering into various different industry critical working groups. And one of the big questions that we've been looking at is, if we plot ahead and consider the mission critical enterprise and consumer services and applications of the future, let's say 2030, if we work backwards from there, what does the network technology evolution need to look like to enable us to get there? And what is it that the industry needs to do to keep us moving along that path? And that's what we're going to discuss and examine in our next session together today. So during this next session, we'll hear from Stefan van Hastel, CTO of Fixed Networks at Nokia. We'll hear from Michael Philpott, Research Director at Omdia. We'll hear from Kevin Hazley, the Strategic Initiatives VP from Ookla. But first of all, I'd like to welcome on stage the Chief Expert for Enhanced Broadband at Huawei Technologies and the Chair of the WBBA Working Group for Next Generation Roadmap, Dr. Markus Brunner.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here. Yes, I was chairing this group, and I would at the start thank to everybody who has contributed to this activity. We had quite intensive discussions along the road, and you will see some of that discussion popping up here as well. So it's really about the next generation broadband roadmap. We have heard about the investment plans and where we stand today, so now we start looking into the future. This is a bit of the agenda where I'm going to. So we start with really what are the market drivers, what are the applications and service drivers, and then move towards the roadmap. So on the market drivers, we already heard the slogan of WBBA, this connectivity for all, because that really has a socioeconomic impact, and this has been proven and shown in many studies around the globe. There is, from a technical perspective, the network agility. We hear a lot of operators and players in the field that they need more agility to adapt to the current needs, adapt to that quickly, and adapt to all the different application areas we are going to see. Network automation is a topic which we have in the industry for quite some time. We need to bring that forward along the line, because manual intervention is really not the way to go these days. And the minimizing environmental impact we already heard about, and we hear more from the sustainability working group here. One sort of mental model we had in mind towards the next generation, that's this sort of increase the efficiency by having one network and having multiple services running on it. It was always been talking about this type of thing, but in reality, we still have quite a number of different networks for different purposes. So one way of making the network much more efficient also sustainable is to have this one network and multiple services approach. In the picture you see, you have enterprise, you have the base stations connected, you have the homes connected, and you have industries connected, and you have optical communication also within industry sites. So we grow the business of fiber communication out into a lot of different fields, which needs different capabilities and different characteristics of the network. So what are the applications and services? This is sort of the difficult thing. It's a bit of a glass ball looking. So what is coming? If you look down the road, what is coming along? So we believe on the consumer demand, naturally there's still the growth of bandwidth. So the need for speed is still there. We see numbers in the 40 to 50% growth of bandwidth, depending on the area. There are new applications, and I think I was talking about this yesterday. For example, an XR free viewpoint type of, we cannot say video anymore, service is basically somewhere in the 2 gigabit per device. So that sort of, if you think about that and you have a few kids at home, which everyone is using that, you see where we talk. Then there is sort of a need for beyond speed type of activities. That's sort of greater Wi-Fi, better consistency of the network service, higher reliability, greater customer services. This is sort of beyond speed. That's sort of the consumer, more home-oriented business we are in today. But then we also want to transform the enterprises and the vertical industries. I mean, the enterprise space, everybody's talking about digitalization. So we need to support with broadband this digitalization and transformation of the business of our customers. And they are sort of broadband into more areas, for example, fiber to the machine, fiber to the room, fiber to devices, all types of things like that. Then there's the whole trend of IoT and AI. If you look at where AI is used today, a lot of AI is used to look into video streams. So you need to transport your video streams, high definition video streams, to a computing site to run AI algorithms on it, to do whatever you want to achieve with that. Cloud and computing connections. So basically the whole cloud area is here, and I don't think it's going to leave us. So we're going to stay with it, and we need to adapt to this way of doing things. Finally, hybrid workplaces has been shown in the pandemic a very effective way to keep our economy running also during these bad times. We have done some of the business directions here. I'm not going to go through this one. We already heard some of it from Martin and Eric. I just want to pick out one thing, and that's sort of this several new applications in the homes. So we believe broadband is not only about getting you a fiber into the home, but it's about looking into the home. There are several new services. There are the distribution of the communication within the homes we need to look at. There are topics of what type of services you run at home on your gateways or on your boxes at home, and this needs to be managed by somebody. So this is sort of one area where we looked into it. Now let's dig into the roadmap part. You've seen that picture already, and you're probably going to see it a few more times. Basically, the assumption is this broadband generation 5 is here in the middle, and in the 5th generation broadband, there is basically the dimension of speed. I mean, that's sort of the natural dimension we talk about since the last few generations already. We have the enhanced connectivity, that means the higher number of connections of fiber endpoints. You have much more fiber. You have much more to the machines, to the rooms, to whatever. And you have the ultra-reliable and consistent service capability. We talk about this in the 5th generation. Now, looking ahead, basically the 3 more dimensions on enhancements we foresee here. One is into the direction of greater sensing capabilities. That goes in the IoT space. I just came back last week from an event. People were talking to use fibers just for sensing. You can use fiber for detecting things, But if you have already fiber, you can also reuse fiber to detecting things. There are a lot of things technically possible, so that's one direction. The other one direction is going into the greater intelligence. Our networks need to be much more intelligent, much more adaptive, need to have included AI capabilities in the network to have the best service possible. And the last one is the trustworthiness and greenness, so the sustainability aspect. So these are sort of three additional dimensions which we believe we need to look into detail along the lines. So this is the broadband 5.5 fifth generation and the broadband 6th generation. On the timeline, basically the assumption is the leading operators are today somewhere in the 5th generation. This is sort of in the ballpark of the XGS deployments going on. And from there on, we look forward into different timelines. In the 3 to 5 years down the road, we see this broadband 5.5, and then even later on the broadband 6th generation. And then Martin was already saying we were adopting the terminology and the numbering from the mobile world in that sense. So we try to synchronize the timing and the thinking behind that also here. You see a few potential applications here, from high quality VR, which you can do today, to the free viewpoint one. That's what I'm saying. If you have 2 gig per stream, you need to do something more than what we have today. And then the 6th generation is really far out. We were just speculating on that. But the mission critical applications and industrial automation type of application, we see a lot of potential there. You have seen the table, and I guess you cannot read it, but these are sort of these dimensions I was talking about, and we try to put certain functionalities and certain KPIs per dimension, per generation. So this table shows, for example, for the broadband 5th generation, we say the residential speed, so the service speed is sort of the 1 gig. That's why everybody talks about the gigabit society today, but then down the road we talk about the 10 gigabit residential service speeds and going beyond. Beyond, naturally, we had a massive discussion where the world is going, but that's part of a community to discuss these topics, bring together the different views on that, and look into what we think, how the world is going. On the outlook, Martin was already mentioning it a little bit. So basically, one area is the new revenue models and monetizable services. That's sort of looking into demand and what can we do for the demand being out there. How do we bring things which are also monetizable? So there is the demand of broadband evolution and sort of what are the new upcoming applications. I mentioned the one example, but the belief is we have a plethora of applications and services around. I'm originally an IP guy. Nobody was asking IP to have a killer application. The application is that you can run a lot of things over it. So that's what the broadband network is about. Then the whole cloud age. So what is the impact of this cloudification and digitalization in the industry, and what impact has this to the broadband networks? That's another area. And the third one is sort of the detailing of the broadband 5.5 and broadband 6 characteristics. I've just shown you the table, and in the report at the moment there's not much more. And as said, there were extensive discussions on that. So we need to detail what are the functionalities needed from the supply side. So what we can provide, what is the technology roadmap, what we can provide when down the road. So we need to have this discussion. And with that, I thank you all for listening. I thank all the contributors. This is the QR code of the generational roadmap paper. You can download that. There's a lot more information on that. Thanks anyway, and see you later on.
Thank you, Marcus. Lots of interesting, I think, trends to track and look out for on that outlook slide there, you know, the cloudification of the broadband networks in particular. I'd like to introduce on stage now one of the founding members of the World Broadband Association, Stefan van Hastel, CTO of Fixed Networks from Nokia.
All right, good morning, everyone. So, in my 15 minutes of fame, so to speak, I chose to talk about Let There Be Light. And there's really two reasons why I chose that title. The first one is rather obvious. You know, there's a lot of talk about fiber. Everyone's investing in fiber. A lot of people realize the importance. But that's not the other reason. The other reason is that this is what I believe the key role of the World Broadband Association and the key value that the World Broadband Association will bring. It's about enlightening the general public. One of the things that annoys me to no end is how good GSMA is at promoting 5G. You talk to a random person in the street, they don't know what 5G is, but they know they want it. So I want the World Broadband Association to create that same sense of excitement around broadband, around fiber access, but also about all the other technologies that are involved in broadband. So let there be light. And it's actually, if you think about it, it should be quite easy to create that sense of excitement. Because if you think about it, we live in a fantastic age. This is truly the gigabit era, even the multi-gigabit era. Today, there are already 450 operators around the globe that are offering a gigabit service. There's more than 90 that are offering a multi-gig service. You can find 2 gigabit, 4 gigabit, 8 gigabit services. A couple of weeks ago, the city of Chattanooga became the first city, or became the first 25 gig city on the planet. So this is actually rather fantastic, especially if you think how far we've come in broadband. You know, I think most people in this room can remember the days where we were getting excited about, you know, about 2 megabits per second, or maybe even 9.6 kilobaud. So you can, of course, argue, you know, do you need a gigabit today? And then the answer would be no. But there's a couple of reasons why this makes absolute sense. Number one, it works as a marketing weapon. And marketing is important. But number two, it actually makes a difference in the user experience. You know, people who get a gigabit service don't go back. It's, you know, they pay a little bit extra. If they wouldn't be happy, if they wouldn't see a difference, they would actually go back to the previous service. And number three, you're not building for today. As Marcus already explained, you're actually building for the future. If you build it, they will come. Someone will figure out a way to use that gigabit service or that multi-gig service to improve their business case. Now, if you look at how technology is evolving to support that gigabit era or that multi-gig era, let's start by looking at fiber to the home. Fiber has come a long way, from the early BPON days and unnamed technologies even before that, to GPON, which was the mainstream technology a couple of years, to XGS-PON, which is now quickly becoming the mainstream technology. From a Nokia perspective, we're now almost shipping as many XGS-PON OLT ports as GPON OLT ports. So we expect that XGS will overtake GPON over the course of this year already. The next steps are already here. 25 gig is available today. And as I mentioned, the city of Chattanooga already has 25 gig live in the network. Many operators are trialing it. In parallel, work is ongoing in standardization and by many vendors on 50 gig technology. So phase one of the technology has already passed standardization, and work is continuing. 100 gig has already been demonstrated, so we can show that you can actually do 100 gig on that fiber to the home network. And this is important for two reasons, not just because, okay, you get more speed as a subscriber, that's always a good thing, but it also shows how future-proof this technology is. If you invest in broadband today, if you invest in fiber, which we all know, requires significant commitment, significant time, significant investment, but that investment will last for generations, and you can keep upgrading the speed and meet future demands. If we look at other access technologies, I'll pick fixed wireless access, for example. Evolution path there is quite straightforward. We had 4G, we now have 5G, work is ongoing on 6G. But 5G has actually established fixed wireless access as a valid future-proof broadband technology as a complement to fiber, as a competitor to fiber. If you are a fixed or a converged operator, you can use fixed wireless access to cover those areas where the business case for fiber to the home will never work. Remote rural areas, mountain villages. If you're a fixed or a converged operator, you can use fixed wireless access as a customer acquisition tool. It gives you a very fast time to market. You can start by covering areas with fixed wireless access, and that gives you time to build out the fiber network. Once the fiber network is there, you can switch customers from fixed wireless access to fiber, and you can free up the 5G spectrum for mobile applications, for example. If you're a mobile operator, then obviously the radio network is the only thing you have, and you can use that radio infrastructure to compete with fiber. You can put a basic fixed wireless access offer, let's say 100 megabits per second in the market, you will be successful. You can even go head-to-head with fiber and compete on a gigabit service, although that will typically require millimeter wave densification of the 5G network and a higher cost, but it's possible. So fiber to the home, fixed wireless access, two key technologies going forward. Now, Marcus just showed this slide, and he already warned you that you might see the slide again. I'm not going to explain it again. Marcus did an excellent job, but I do want to comment on it, because I think the World Broadband Association made 4 critical decisions when we were defining the generational roadmap for broadband that were absolutely the right decisions. And the first decision was, it's not just about speed. Yes, speed is important, and everyone always talks about speed. I did the same thing 2 slides ago. But it's also about other attributes of the broadband experience. It's about adding more intelligence. It's about moving towards sensing. It's about latency. It's about reliability. It's about power consumption. So that's an important thing that has been captured in the generational roadmap from the World Broadband Association. That's one. Number 2, and you've seen this slide before as well. Number 2, this is not a technology roadmap. This roadmap starts from the user experience. It starts from services. And that's absolutely important. Of course, and that's then number 3, we do map technology evolution on that roadmap in order to be able to support those capabilities that we have identified in the roadmap. But the really interesting part is that the technology roadmap is not a fiber roadmap. We talk a lot about fiber, but this is about any broadband technology that can support those requirements. It's also about the technologies that we need to extend that experience into the home. So it's fiber, it's fixed wireless access, it's satellite, it's cable, it's DSL, it's Wi-Fi in the home, and everything else that you need. So that was the third thing that I think we as a World Broadband Association got right. The fourth and final thing is that this is not a residential roadmap. Sure, it starts with residential because that's where broadband started. So you see the evolution from SD to HD to 4K to beyond. You see the evolution to virtual reality, to holographic content, etc., etc. But it also shows an evolution beyond residential. It shows the evolution of the broadband network to support mission-critical services. And I actually personally believe that's a really important thing, because one of the things we see today in the industry is a growing realization that, for example, the fiber to the home network is not just a network that connects homes. It's rather a fiber infrastructure that passes every street, that passes every building, and that fiber infrastructure can be used to connect homes, obviously, but you can also use it to connect businesses, to connect smart city infrastructure, to connect small cells. So that evolution is critical because it actually means you can use the broadband network for more purposes, but of course, as an operator, it means you get more revenue streams on your broadband network, and that means that the business case looks significantly more attractive. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've said this before, that you can use the broadband network for more than just residential broadband. So why is it actually going to happen this time? And I think there are 2 main reasons. The first one is we have almost endless capacity, finally. When you think about it, if we get a gig to every home, if fiber technology is evolving to 25 to 50 to 100 gig and even beyond, capacity is no longer a bottleneck. That's one. But the second part is that we actually are also working on mechanisms to make that capacity easily consumable. The move to software-defined networks means that you can slice a network, that you can program the slices in a network in different ways to support different services, and to make each slide behave to support exactly the service that you want it to support. So lots of capacity, plus a very easy way to make that capacity available to different players, to different services. That's key. Now, my final slide. I said in the beginning that one of the key objectives of one of the key goals or ambitions of the World Broadband Association is to create that sense of excitement about broadband. And our job should actually be quite easy, because if you think about it, broadband has a lot to offer. Number one, broadband is something that helps governments and society bridge the digital divide. Any politician wants to be associated with that, right? If you can give people in rural areas access to remote learning, to remote healthcare, it's just fantastic. Number two, you can unlock innovation. If you bring broadband or gigabit services to a region, you attract investment, you attract new companies, you allow those companies to experiment with innovative services, with new ideas. Number three, broadband actually helps save the planet. Because of broadband, people can work from home. We take cars off the road. We reduce the number of business trips and transatlantic flights that are necessary. We can do smart metering to reduce peak power consumption, etc., etc. Broadband has an enormous impact on the CO2 footprint of almost every other industry out there. Number four, broadband is future-proof. Like I said, if you're deploying fiber today, it's going to last for generations. You can keep upgrading the capacity. You're going to meet any future demand. So what other investment can you make that's actually going to last for generations to come? And finally, what other investments will allow everyone to watch cat videos on YouTube? So with that, thank you. If you're interested to support, if you're interested to help us evangelize and advocate broadband, please join us.
Thank you, Stefan. I think enlightening and exciting the public around the power of broadband access, as you said, I think is a great mission statement for all of our individual organizations, but also as a collective at the World Broadband Association. So we look forward to you joining us on that evangelizing journey. So coming up next, we have our first panel discussion of the day. And as such, I'd like to welcome onto the stage this morning. Just bear with me a second here. The program seems to be running to a different order. I'd like to welcome onto stage Mr. Feng, President of Optical Networks from Huawei. We'll welcome Stefan back, CTO of Fixed Networks from Nokia, of course. Kevin Hazley, VP of Strategic Initiatives from Ookla, and my Omdia colleague, Research Director and Chair for the panel, Michael Philpott.
In the hot seat. No, I don't think so. Thank you, and thank you to the panelists. You can tell we're at a broadband conference talking about high speed, because it's the first conference that I've ever been to where we're actually ahead of schedule. So what that does mean is that as well as my questions I've prepared, we do have time to go out to the audience as well. So if you've got any burning questions that you'd like to ask, and perhaps also other speakers might also want to get involved in that. So if you do have questions, when I come, I'll kind of keep an eye out for hands going up, and we can take some from the floor. Okay. Okay.
Would it make sense to have the speakers a little bit more center stage?
Happy.
A little bit better with the light.
You're so far away.
If you come a little bit forward, and then spread out a bit.
Okay.
With the projections,
Yep.
would that be?
No, it's okay.
All right.
Cool. I'd like to start. I remember I've been an analyst for quite a long time, and it was with BT before that. I remember in the days of the old ADSL, if you remember that, I remember attending a conference very similar to this, and we were talking about speeds of 100 megabits per second down to the home, and even that raised a few eyebrows. And now we've been hearing about the roadmap where we're talking 50 gigabits plus down to the home in the future. So I know we've talked a little bit about the applications in some of the presentations, but I just wanted to start with, and I guess to Stefan, I'd be interested also to your opinion on this, Kevin, about what do you see as being the kind of residential applications that are truly going to drive that kind of demands on the network?
Okay, maybe I can start. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. So I think there's not a single thing. Well, actually, I'll correct myself. If I would have to name a single thing, I think at the moment it's human impatience, right? So people simply don't want to wait. If you have to download a file, if you're using an online application, the more responsive, the faster you get the data on your PC, the better the user experience. It's that simple. Looking to the future, I don't see a single killer application, but it's a multitude of applications that are each going to consume megabits per second. So if you have a number of people that are using a number of applications at the same time, you're actually very quickly going to see that peak bandwidth demands go up. One that's worth pointing out is, okay, people always say, well, video is going to remain fairly flat. Resolution increases, but as we get more powerful devices, we can move to more powerful compression techniques. So overall, video bandwidth remains fairly flat. Yeah, but for example, if you look at cloud gaming, latency becomes critical. You're going to have the same thing with cloud VR. Latency is critical, which means you actually can't waste time on compressing, right? So you're going to see a move towards more uncompressed video. For example, cloud gaming today, the latest gaming consoles already consume 20 megabit per second, and that's a single game by a single person. So it's going to be that, yes, there's going to be an evolution, but it's also the concurrent use, multiple applications, multiple people, that's going to drive that.
Kevin, I don't know from Ookla's perspective, if the kind of things that you're seeing on the network.
Yeah, I would totally agree with everything Stefan said. The thing that want to take note is some of the hidden things that we don't even think about. Apple Watches, Ring doorbells, Ring security systems. And myself, I have 5 cameras at home just pointing for security purposes. All those are recording. All of them are being sent to the server. And one critical thing is if they don't send it to the server, you lost. And so just an anecdotal conversation here. I was traveling just like this at a trade show, and I got a notice that somebody broke into the house. And I was watching the thief take everything, noticing the console, that took my Xbox and everything. I was watching the thief go in and called the police and watched the police grab the person. And so that was on the news and everything happened. If we didn't have that reliable internet connection and the fast speeds, I would have never got notified. I would have never called the police while I was traveling clear across the country. And those are the kind of things that you don't even think about that needs that fast, reliable. It's those use cases. Everybody talks about, yes, cloud gaming, but it's those hidden applications that more and more connections in the home require that bandwidth, require those multi-connections. If not, we would never be able to be really safe at home with all that security now.
And that's actually, so I like that comment about the hidden bandwidth generators, because one of the things you see is that a lot of things are becoming video. Things that you wouldn't expect to be video actually involve video. For example, I used to have motion detectors in my home. I've replaced it with cameras that do video analytics, right? So instead of having a motion sensor that sends 1 bit per hour, there's movement or there's no movement, I now have 3 cameras that send an HD stream to the cloud constantly for analysis. Similarly, one of the most popular dictionaries today is TikTok. So something that would actually require bytes, looking up a word on Wikipedia or on an online dictionary. Younger generations go to TikTok, and instead of bytes per second, they watch an HD video of someone explaining what the word means. So a lot of things are simply becoming video. That's also driving bandwidth consumption.
Mr. Feng, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think the most important is experience, right? So I think the network deployment should improve the experience. As far as I know, so far for PBF, 5G can provide 1G bandwidth to the subscribers, right? So the most important is how to improve the experience. And I think for the experience, the first should be ultra high broadband. The second should be like a ultra low latency. The third should be like green, low carbon. And the first should be like intelligent, like operation and maintenance. And the fifth should be like seamless roaming due to the Wi-Fi connection technology. The last one I think should be like intelligent connections, because a lot of IoT devices were connected to the network. Yeah, I think we should find some approach to improve the experience by innovation. Yes, so that's my point of view. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, it's interesting. We talk a lot about applications, driving network, but should we also be thinking about the different devices as well? Because if you think about, you mentioned video, one of the big drivers of video was actually the birth of the smartphone, really. Without the smartphone, we wouldn't have seen that massive ramp up in online video. So should we also think about the type of devices in the future, the shift from devices such as this to more wearable and glasses? Does that have an impact on or will that have an impact on the network as well?
I'll just go first. Yes, absolutely. Especially everybody's going to have those. And when you add more and more devices on there, simultaneous connections can have a dramatic effect on somebody else's connection speeds or just the reliability of loading. For instance, in my home, when my wife is doing some online education or training, and I'm connecting either to my watch or on my phone or even on a Zoom session myself, those multiple connections really take a toll on the overall network performance. So when you add more and more devices, it's going to require more and more capabilities. And I noticed all the generational roadmaps, that is key to actually do all the things that we need to do at home. And especially in some of the conversations we'll have later, the rural connections and adding more and more at-home scenarios versus in the business, it's at home becomes your central business enterprise location. So that's going to be really the key hotspot in the future.
Yeah. And the thing with wearable devices or implants is that both space and power are at a premium. So you're not going to have massive processors implanted in your body, right? So whatever the sensors pick up, it's going to go to the cloud for analytics, and it's going to have to come back. So by definition, those devices will generate significant amounts of traffic.
Yeah, and we talked about the roadmap, and we've seen the kind of roadmap. I was just wondering, to come to you, Mr. Feng. I mean, do we have to use these applications that we're talking about to use those devices? Do we have to wait until we get to that BB6 at the end of the roadmap, or are there kind of stepping stones that we can be using to kind of get there in the meantime?
Okay, so my understanding is BB 5G. Someone call F5G, so is current generation technology. BB 6G, F6G is next generation technology. So BB 5G can provide 1 Gbps bandwidth to everything. So like F60 maybe can provide like 10 G bandwidth to everything. I think it was what I just said, because the directions for network deployment is driven by new service, right? So for new services, so the experience is a key. I think the experience is a key. So what I just said for the experience, and I think maybe 6 requirements for digital experience. The first is what I just said, ultra high band. The second is like ultra low latency. The third is green carbon, low carbon. The fifth is intelligent operation and maintenance. And then next is seamless roaming. The last one should be intelligent connections. And I think we should focus on how to improve the experience, because BB F5G is current generation technology, and BB6 is the next generation technology. For current, we should find a project to improve the experience. So this is a key point for BB 5G. So that's my point. Okay.
Kevin, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think with 5G evolution and 5G advance, there's a lot of things coming down the pipe that actually will speed up networks and have a dramatic effect on the throughput. One thing Martin mentioned earlier, and one we all should take consideration, it's not about speed, it's about the latency. We mentioned latency many times. And there's a couple technologies even Nokia is dealing with L4S, low latency for scalable throughput, as well as smart adaptable queue management, which means that all of us deal with internet. When you see those little images come up and one image doesn't come up or the other one, it's because the packets are having issues coming down the transport. So there's new technologies that will help alleviate that. So by the time we get to 6G, all that's being taken care of because the next generation technologies already have that consideration in the technology, but it's 2030 by the time we get there. But there's certain technologies that we need to approach now that'll help fix the networks today in order to help that. I noticed on the roadmap, metaverse coming up, that helps those technologies be deployed easier than waiting for 2030 until we get there for 6G.
Yeah. I mean, as an industry, we always seem to be obsessed by speed. We seem to be obsessed by speed ever since broadband was first rolled out. I mean, should operators, and you also mentioned that codecs continue to get improvements and drive those kind of speeds, or the need for those speeds down. So should actually we be pushing speed to one side and focusing more now on latency and jitter, or is speed just as important as it always has been?
I think you typically have you typically have two trends, right? So on one hand, new applications drive demand on the network or on network capacity. On the other hand, network capacity drives innovation in the application space. And I think at the moment, at least in the fixed network side of the network, we're no longer in a push scenario where applications push the network, but we're in a pull scenario where the network has capacity, significant capacity, and actually gives free rein to innovators to come up with whatever crazy idea they want. So I think on the bandwidth side, we're actually, on the fixed network side, certainly in an area with 10 gig, 25 gig, 50 gig technology, we're on the comfortable side. So I would agree with you that it's important to focus on on aspects other than pure capacity, but it will also require an education of the public, because everyone loves the idea that you can compare two things by using one number. You have to choose between two cameras, megapixels, right? I'll pick the one with the largest amount of megapixels. It's the same with speed, right? So I think but okay, that at some point, and sorry, I'm going a bit long, at some point that is also going to disappear, just like in cameras or in PCs. A couple of years ago when you bought a PC, you knew exactly how many megahertz you were going to buy. Why? Because it was too slow, right? So more was better. Same with megapixels. Today, if you buy a phone, fewer and fewer people, if you look at Google searches, fewer and fewer people worry about megapixels. Why? Because whatever camera you get, it's going to be enough megapixels. Once you get into the multi-gig era, I think people will also stop worrying about speed. But it's our job as an industry to explain to them that it's not just speed, it's latency, it's deterministic latency, it's low jitter. That's going to become key. And operators, okay, we as an industry, we need to educate the audience. It's not going to be easy because it's not as easy as comparing two numbers, but we need to do that because otherwise it's a speed game and then it becomes a race to the bottom.
Are you seeing that, Kevin, from Ookla's position? Because I know that at one time it's all about speed in the data that you produced, and now you're producing and publishing data on latency. Are you seeing more and more users looking at that and kind of measuring those metrics as well as the speeds, or is it still the focus on the top line speed?
You're exactly right. It's the education. So from Ookla's standpoint, we see all users, consumers are still confused, right? They will be confused for quite a while of speed. And because they're getting educated itself from the industry on speed's the only thing that's important. Even FCC, when they release their guidelines, they're just upping the speed. But they're not saying anything about consistency, reliability, or even the latency figures. So we all in the industry need to educate everyone on that aspect of speed is one important factor, but there's many other metrics, and Ookla is collecting that information and displaying it to the screen itself when the user does speedtest.net, that's who we are, you'll see that needle go up, but you then, after the results are there, you'll see ping, latency, jitter, all the other factors that show if it's a good improvement or good network experience. You have to have all of those metrics combined to show the consumer and educate them better.
We're talking about megabits from an analyst point of view. It's something we look at the time. We're doing revenue charts, ARPU charts, and we can see that the price per megabit continues to decline, and we'll do as time goes on. Here we're kind of advocating that operators should continue to invest huge amounts of money, pushing fiber out to 100% of households, wherever they are, to 5G base stations, etc. I'd like to ask all of you, really, is this something that we should expect service providers to just continue to blindly invest in? Is there a decent return on investment there? I know that some of the speakers talked about invest once, multiple use cases, but are there other things that regulators or government should be doing to kind of encourage a better return on investment for operators, or is this still a good business for them to be in? And I don't know, Mr. Feng, do you want to start on that one, or perhaps Stefan? I know it's a big question, but...
Yeah, I think it's a big question. Because the fiber investment is a big investment. So I think for the operators, the most important is how to continue to improve like ARPU to achieve the growth. I think for the revenue growth is pretty important for operators, and the profit is the second. If the operators can continue to grow, I think the investment can be get. So this is my point. Just a fun approach to improve the ARPU, to attract much more subscribers, which can increase the revenue, increase the profit. I think this is pretty important for operators. Yes.
Anybody else would like to comment? Or?
I think on a number of occasions in the past, I've thought to myself, well, surely now we have a lot of bandwidth for everybody, right? And I've always been wrong. So I'm going to preface my answer by saying I don't know what I don't know, right? There's a lot of smart people out there that probably will figure out a way to fill a gigabit pipe. And I have no idea what it will be, but I'm definitely willing to admit that I don't know. But going back to the previous question, I think it's important that as an industry we move away from speed as the only metric. And we educate people, if you're really looking at these advanced, if you're really starting to look at more advanced services with more interaction, latency, consistency, reliability are becoming more and more critical.
Is the roadmap that we're showing earlier, I mean, and I know Marcus referred to it as leading operators, those currently at BB5, and then the roadmap was kind of leading out to 50 gigabits per second for those operators, but is this also applicable to emerging countries? I mean, should they also, operators in those countries, be looking at this roadmap and also look into that kind of ambition to get those kind of speeds and that kind of capability out there, or is that just unrealistic at the moment for those markets?
Two ways to look at it. Okay, one, if you have to choose between speed and coverage, you should prioritize coverage, right? So it's more important that everyone gets access to, let's say, 100 megabit per second and access to e-health and e-learning, and you bridge the digital divide. Of the two priorities, I would say that's the most important one. But in parallel, operators and governments should encourage, operators should invest and governments should encourage investment in in higher speeds, right? So we see that happening. You know, some areas you're going to a gig and multi-gig, and other areas we still have to, and in quite a sizable portion of the planet, we still have to ensure that basic connectivity. Now that's one part of the answer. So you would say, you know, 20 meg is better than 0 from that angle. The other angle is that in many developing countries, we actually see greenfield deployments starting immediately, you know, skipping a few generations. They start with multi-pond technology, for example. If we talk about fiber, they start with 5G fixed wireless access, and they actually immediately catch up. The beauty is you don't have to go through all the previous generations to get here, right? You can jump in right at generation 5 or generation 6 and be on par with more developed regions. So it's also an opportunity to catch up very quickly.
I'll just add real quick. From an Ookla standpoint, we just released our global index numbers again for the month, and obviously we work with Omdia. It's in your fiber development index reports as well. It's very surprising to see the country list and who's on top. Norway has always been on top of the countries that are actually developing new technologies and getting more and more speeds from fixed to mobile out there. But surprisingly, other countries that you wouldn't suspect are rising in the ranks, like India, who just launched their 5G network. So those are the countries that surprisingly are adapting to the new technologies, growing in there because they see the consumer demand. And so we feel that we feel very confident that the new emerging markets will gain the technology because consumers are really using those use cases that we are very surprised of. TikTok blew everybody away of the demand. The next demand in those type of use cases are the live shopping. So when you see something on TikTok, you immediately can buy it. And those interactions are going to change the industry again. And we can't be caught off guard. And we need to make sure that the revenue, going back to your ROI, is there when you build it, as Eric highlighted in the fiber to the home. When you build it, it will come because eventually you're going to see those use cases. We'll all be surprised about next time coming in the next 2 years that immediately capture the imagination of consumers. They start buying, and guess where that revenue is going? Back in the pocket, the fiber being built out.
Yeah, you mentioned the index, and because of what Stefan mentioned about being able to, those emerging markets leapfrog generations, they zoom up the rankings very fast, don't they? We talked a lot about the access and the core network. I just want to turn our attention a little bit to the home network for a moment, because that's become a very critical part. I think we've all, especially during COVID, we're all working from home, we suddenly realize how critical that home Wi-Fi network is. So I'd just like to come to Mr. Feng and ask, within this vision, how important is that home network element, and I guess what's Huawei's technology they've been developing to enhance that experience within the home?
Okay. So because home network is first access point to connect to the network. So in the past few years, so home network has changed a lot. For example, the Wi-Fi connection 20 years ago, and people use Ethernet cable to connect the network. So far, people use Wi-Fi to connect the network. So the end user's experience is largely determined by home network. So my suggestion, that is Huawei now direction, is how to improve home network experience for the subscribers. I think including high bandwidth, I think the no latency is the directions for home network evolution. So far, 1G bandwidth is a mainstream, and maybe 5 or 10 years later, 10G bandwidth will be popular for home network. For Huawei, now we are allowed to develop FTTR for home network, because FTTR using fiber for backhaul. So fiber is advanced productivity. Now using fiber to replace copper or Ethernet cable I think is to use the advanced productivity to replace the backward productivity. I think this may be the direction for home network evolution. So this is Huawei point of view. Thank you.
Any other comments on that one?
Yeah, maybe. So you get the same challenges in the home network as you get in the last mile network. And as an industry, you tend to get focused on, people say gaming as an example of people who require a lot from the network. And then you immediately think about the people who invest thousands of euros or dollars in setups and special chairs and keyboards and whatever. But the majority of the gaming market is actually, probably 95%, is actually casual gamers. Right? Those are people who like to play a game. And by the way, gaming industry, I think the last number I saw was 180 billion a year, which is more than the movie industry. But even casual gamers like to win, right? So these are not people who are going to invest in Ethernet cabling in the home. They are not going to invest in special chairs or PCs or screens or whatever. They're just going to connect a device to Wi-Fi. Right? So to me, the important part of Wi-Fi is to make sure, speed, Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 7, speed always improves. The other aspects there are equally important. Low latency, especially deterministic latency, low jitter are key. That's why in Nokia we've been focusing on a number of technologies, adaptive queue management, better queuing algorithms. Someone mentioned, Kevin, you mentioned L4S. If you haven't heard of that acronym, it's low loss, low latency, scalable. But it's basically, it's a prioritization mechanism that can give you a fast path through the entire mechanism from the app to the server. And I think that's the sort of things that as an industry we also need to work on to make sure that the casual gamer can actually win at Angry Birds or whatever it is they're playing.
Okay, I'm just going to there's a question from the floor. Excellent.
Hi there. Dean Bubley from Disruptive Analysis. Looking at the things about the sort of network generation roadmap, it strikes me that, whatever the number is, 90%, 95% of broadband traffic goes to and from the public internet or public cloud. So where do internet peering points and internet exchanges fit into this sort of vision of the future with the F5G and F6G? Yeah, I mean, ultimately, an awful lot's got to go via peering. So how do you get stuff to those peering points quickly?
Was there any particular...
Looking Nokia. So from an Ookla data set, we see a lot of traffic go through the hops in the internet, and that's why I mentioned smart adaptive queue management before, because we see a lot of things that can happen in an internet pipeline that blocks the traffic. So I haven't seen anything on the roadmap that mentions technologies that fixes and addresses that. So my standpoint, I totally agree. There has to be something that really thinks about that, because it's one thing to have a generational system put in place, but if the peering agreements are not settled, you still got major holdups in the whole pipeline itself. So the consumer experience is going to be just as bad as it was before on even generational hops if you don't address the backbone.
Yep, I'm an access guy. I have nothing. I have nothing to add at this point.
Okay, question from me.
There we go. Maybe following on from that consumer experience. We've talked a lot today about World Broadband Association, but in reality, a lot of our discussion's been around fibre. And then in the previous answer, we talked a lot about fibre plus Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 7. How important is adding in the mobility angle to this from a consumer experience point of view? The seamlessness where your customer experience in your on your home fibre or your work fibre environment is transferred seamlessly into a 5G, 6G environment. And should the WBBA be trying to think that broadly as an umbrella of broadband connectivity rather than being maybe more laser focused on fibre? I think that makes
enormous amount of sense, to be honest. Anything that can simplify the experience for the user is a good thing, just based on friends and family who are definitely intelligent people, but if you see how they struggle to just get things working and talking to each other, it's a significant struggle, and we sometimes tend to forget that if you're in this industry, because you're used to the technology, and at the very least you understand what needs to talk to what in order to make something happen, and you can figure it out. You can figure it out from there. We think I want to give even a more generic answer, because I think we've been talking a lot about fiber. Fiber clearly is not an island, right? So one of the things we've learned in this industry since the early days is that there's no single technology that's the best answer in every possible case. So yes, I like talking. I'll be the first to admit that I like talking about fiber because it's green. It's future-proof. I'll see how I'm advertising fiber again, right? I can't stop myself. But DSL upgrades are going to continue to play a role. Cable upgrades are going to continue to play a role. Fixed wireless access is going to be a complement. Satellite broadband is going to be a complement, right? So you need to pick the right tool. You need to pick the right tool for the job. So yeah, I'll definitely admit I know I get trapped in the fiber story, right? But it's all of these technologies.
The good news is, from Ookla, we run our sentiment analysis, and from a consumer perspective, one good thing that we've seen over the past 5 years is a lot of consumers getting more smart about what they choose at home. We've seen the industry impact on FWA, for instance, from major carriers. And so obviously that still involves fiber, but the one thing consumers are better educated on, they have a choice. We never had choices before. We either have Comcast, Spectrum, At Home, Xfinity, but now we have Verizon, we have AT&T. Not only do they have it at home, where they are more comfortable and getting a lot more use cases, but then they can go outside the home and they're 5G with the same experience from Verizon that they're used to, and just go out the door with 5G. And so to go back to the point, I think it's part of WBBA to actually continue educating that it's just not about fiber, but it's all the technologies out there, and encompass everything to make sure we're educating on all the options. And I loved your point about satellite, because everybody has heard Starlink, but if you haven't used it yet, it is a really good system. And so that's even becoming a very big contender in this whole network side. And what the moves on Apple's making with the emergency service on the satellite system, that's a huge industry changer, that someday we may just have an iPhone sitting there or an Android phone with satellite connectivity versus your mobile connectivity. That could change in the next 5 years.
And to come back to Martin's question, it's actually necessary that we care about that, right? Because for the end user, everything is broadband. And most of us in the room probably know the phenomenon that if your printer doesn't work, you call your internet provider, right, or your service provider, because my printer doesn't connect to Wi-Fi. I'll call my service provider. As we introduce more and more devices in the home, you're going to see that number of problems explode, right? So it's why you see initiatives like Matter and Thread popping up. But if we don't figure out as an industry how to make sure that stuff just works, we're going to get inundated with calls about everything. My fridge won't talk to my app.
Any other questions from the floor? Excellent. So I'd just like to finish with just one last question, and then we can wrap up for an early lunch, I guess. Both Eric and Marcus mentioned the concept of rolling out one fiber network and then monetizing that many times, use the same network for residential, for business, for mobile, backhaul, for everything and everything. All sounds very sensible, all sounds very good business sense. But we all know that telcos kind of don't work like that. They still work very much in their silos, at least certainly that's been my past experience. I'm just wondering very quickly, both from Stefan and And Mr. Feng, just from your experience of working with operators around the world, I mean, is that type of business model starting to become reality, or are they still working very separately in business models?
It's, I would say it's starting. I mean, your comment about the organizational silos in incumbent operators is definitely spot on. The business case makes sense, but you have to work around the organizational limitations. What we do see is that, you know, you also have a lot of greenfield deployments. You have new players coming into the markets. They don't have an installed base. They don't have an organizational history. And for those players, it actually makes perfect sense to, when you deploy a fiber broadband network, here I go again with fiber, but okay. When you deploy a fiber broadband network, to immediately take into account that you're going to run more than just a residential service on that network. So it's actually easier for them. So the business case makes sense. For new players, it's easy to get started. For established players, it will take some more time.
Mr. Feng, did you want to add? Or?
Yeah, I support using like a one network for all of the users, because this is a pretty economic product solution. And for operators using like a one network, provide a different like service for different customers. I think this is a good approach and is a good solution. Yes, which is feasible. Yes.
Cool. So if there's no more questions from the floor, I think we're ready to wrap up. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for the panelists.
Thanks, Michael.
And hand it back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Mr. Feng. Thank you, Stefan. We're going to break for lunch shortly. We will be coming back here and starting again from 2 p.m. But I think I just want to first of all thank all of the speakers and the panelists for this morning's session. Special thanks to WBBA Director General Martin Kriener for his welcome address. I think looking back over this morning, I think, you know, interesting to hear from Eric from the FTTH Council, particularly, you know, the need to invest in future-proof networks came out very clearly, both in Eric's presentation, but also in the panel discussion, when we think about enabling the use cases of the future, which are going to really generate, you know, top ROI. And also an interesting comment around, you know, the importance of balance between public and private investment. You know, Marcus from Huawei and Stefan from Nokia spoke about the good work that the World Broadband Association has been doing around developing that next generation roadmap for broadband, and the critical fact that it's designed around not just speed, but also from a user experience and not a technology perspective. Coming up from 2 p.m, we'll be back here to look at the importance of sustainability in operators' broadband strategies. And we'll also be looking at some of the most innovative use cases that are being delivered right now, which we believe at the WBBA exemplify best practice. And we'll be hearing from speakers including Etsy, OpenReach, Chorus, Nokia, Ookla, and the FTTH Council. Before we break, I'd just like to invite all the speakers to join me on stage for a photo opportunity, and we'll see everybody back here after lunch at 2 p.m. Thank you.